January 17, 1943, North Africa. The morning sun spills over the sand ridges of Tunisia, painting the airfield in copper light. A pair of twin-boomed fighters roar down the makeshift runway, engines howling with a sound unlike any other in the war. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, sleek, silver, menacing. Moments later, they vanish into the haze. Minutes pass then. Over the distant Mediterranean, two black specks grow larger. German Messerschmitts. A dogfight unfolds high above the desert, the twisting contrails, marking death's dance. The P-38 dives, nearly shuddering apart at 400 miles per hour. The controls freeze. Compressibility. The silent killer. The pilot fights to pull up, his hands slick with sweat. Too late. Below, the wreckage burns on the sand. Another Lightning lost. To some, the aircraft is a marvel of American engineering. To others, it is a death trap. Yet in time, this same machine will haunt German skies, feared, unstoppable, the herald of Allied air superiority. That transformation from disaster to dominance begins long before this moment. The story of the P-38 Lightning begins not in war, but in uncertainty. In 1937, the world still stood on the edge of catastrophe across the Atlantic. Germany's Luftwaffe was growing at a terrifying pace, and the United States, still mired in isolationist policies, lagged behind. The U.S. Army Air Corps needed a fighter that could break the limits of range and speed, one that could escort bombers far beyond what any single-engine aircraft could manage. Out of that challenge came Circular Proposal X-608, a radical request for a high-altitude interceptor capable of 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Few believed it could be done, but at Lockheed's new research facility in Burbank, California, a small team of engineers led by Clarence Kelly Johnson, only 27 years old at the time, accepted the impossible. Johnson's design would be unlike anything the Air Corps had ever seen. Instead of one fuselage, he drew two slender booms housing turbo-supercharged Allison V1710 engines, joined by a central nacelle that held the cockpit and armament. It was a machine born of engineering necessity and aerodynamic daring, the world's first true twin-engine interceptor. In January 1939, the prototype XP-38 made its first flight at Marchfield, California, to witnesses. It looked like something from the future, long, sleek, metallic on its first cross-country flight to test its performance. The XP-38 set a transcontinental speed record, but crashed on landing due to carburetor icing, despite the loss. The Air Corps was convinced Lockheed received an order for 13 P-38 service test models, the beginning of a legend. But even as engineers refined the Lightning's lines, the Air Corps faced a truth that would haunt them for years. Radical innovation comes with radical problems. The P-38's twin-engine layout demanded intricate controls. Its turbo-superchargers, built by General Electric, pushed performance to new heights, but were notoriously temperamental. And the aircraft's compressibility issue, the sudden loss of control during high-speed dives, would claim many young pilots before anyone fully understood what was happening. Still, there was no turning back. War had erupted in Europe by the fall of 1940. France had fallen, and Britain stood alone. The U.S. military's desperate modernization meant that Lockheed's engineers worked around the clock, day and night shifts, under the newly built, camouflage-covered roof of Plant A1 in Burbank. The Lightning was being forged in a race against time. When America entered the war in December 1941, the P-38 was one of the few U.S. fighters with the range and speed to operate over the vast distances that loomed ahead: the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and soon occupied Europe. But early combat trials exposed every flaw. The P-38D and P-38E models, rushed into service, suffered engine failures, fuel leaks, And pilot training accidents, ground crews called it the fork-tailed devil, half in admiration, half in frustration. Many pilots feared it more than the enemy, its complex systems, untested in field conditions, made it as dangerous to its own men as to any foe. And yet, the Air Corps persisted. They had no alternative. The P-40 and P-39 lacked altitude and range. The P-47 was still in development. The Lightning was America's only hope for a long-range, high-altitude escort and reconnaissance fighter. By early 1942, the first operational squadrons equipped with P-38s, the 1st Fighter Group and 14th Fighter Group, began forming. These early units would carry the burden of discovery, learning how to fly, fight, and survive in an aircraft no one fully understood. They would pay dearly for that knowledge. Training accidents mounted engines overheated in tropical climates, and pilots reported violent tail buffeting in dives. But at Lockheed, Kelly Johnson refused to surrender to the aircraft's flaws. He saw potential. An aircraft that, if understood, could fly higher, faster, and farther than any enemy fighter on Earth. To Johnson, the P-38 was not a failure, it was an unfinished masterpiece. And as 1942 turned to 1943, the Lightning's trial by fire was about to begin in skies far from home. Over seas and deserts where survival depended on whether innovation could outrun death. By early 1943, the P-38 Lightning had reached the front lines, not in Europe, as many expected, but across the farthest reaches of the globe, the Pacific theater, with its immense distances and lack of infrastructure, became the proving ground for Lockheed's bold experiment. From the steaming jungles of New Guinea to the coral runways of Guadalcanal, pilots of the 5th Air Force climbed into their twin-boomed machines and learned to master them, or die trying in the early days. The Lightning's reliability was questionable. Tropical humidity wreaked havoc on the Allison engines, and mechanics fought corrosion and constant shortages of spare parts. Yet, when it worked, the aircraft was unmatched. With turbo superchargers boosting power at altitude, the P-38 could reach Japanese bombers where other American fighters could not. Its central nose armament, 450 caliber, Browning machine guns and 120mm cannon, delivered lethal precision, with no need for wind-gun convergence in a straight line. It could outrun nearly every Japanese fighter, but its size and weight made it less agile in tight turns. And Japanese pilots quickly learned to exploit that. Dogfighting a Zero with suicide Lightning pilots had to fight differently, using boom and zoom tactics, diving from altitude, striking fast, and climbing away before the enemy could react. That doctrine, taught by experience rather than manuals, began to pay off by late 1943. Pilots like Richard Bong, Thomas Maguire, and Charles MacDonald were rewriting the rules of aerial warfare. Their P-38s became airborne snipers, striking Japanese formations with speed and precision that stunned the Imperial Air Force. But as the Pacific Aces rose to fame, a very different story unfolded over North Africa and the Mediterranean. In November 1942, during Operation Torch, P-38s of the 1st Fighter Group flew their first combat missions against Vichy French and later German forces. The Lightning's long range allowed it to escort bombers deep into Tunisia, a capability no other Allied fighter possessed at the time, but the aircraft's temperamental systems and the brutal desert conditions tested every pilot's nerve. Engine failures in flight were common. The cockpit overheated under the African sun, and early models lacked cockpit insulation. Pilots reported losing consciousness from heat and fatigue. Many never returned, yet for those who survived, the Lightning became a tool of mastery, a weapon that, once understood, offered near limitless potential. By mid-1943, as Allied forces advanced into Italy, the P-38F and P-38G variants began to show their worth. Improved cooling systems, reinforced control surfaces, and better pilot training started to transform the Lightning's reputation. It was no longer seen as a death trap, but as a specialist's aircraft, demanding, yes, but devastating when flown correctly. In Europe, however, the Lightning faced its toughest challenge yet. The 8th Air Force, based in England, needed a fighter that could escort bombers all the way to Germany, and back. The P-38 was chosen for its range. But the bitter cold of high-altitude European missions exposed new flaws. Engines froze, cockpit heaters failed, and turbochargers malfunctioned. Many Lightnings never made it back from those first deep penetration raids. Luftwaffe pilots, initially cautious of the twin-engine silhouette, quickly adapted. They found the P-38 heavy in turns and vulnerable in sustained combat. Some German ace reports mocked the Lightning as clumsy, yet they also respected its speed and firepower. In the right hands, it was deadly. The U.S. Army Air Forces refused to abandon it. Instead, they doubled down on improvements, introducing the P-38J and later the P-38L, which fixed many of the earlier problems with new intercoolers, boosted engine power, and drop tanks. The Lightning began to reach its full potential. And as 1944 approached, a quiet confidence settled among those who flew it. They had endured crashes, malfunctions, and the deaths of friends. They had learned every quirk, every weakness. The Lightning was no longer the strange twin-boomed outsider. It was evolving, and soon it would face the Luftwaffe again. But this time, the outcome would be different. For many pilots, the P-38's greatest enemy wasn't the Luftwaffe. It was the aircraft itself. Transitioning from single-engine fighters like the P-40 to the twin-engine Lightning was a shock. Everything was different. From startup to stall, the cockpit was filled with levers, gauges, and dials that overwhelmed new recruits. There were 2 throttles, 2 mixtures, 2 prop controls. One mistake, one misstep could mean disaster. Early training accidents were common. A rookie who lost an engine on takeoff could spin in before he even cleared the runway. Veterans learned fast. Treat the Lightning with respect, or it would kill you. But those who mastered it swore by it. Once you knew her, one pilot said, she could take you anywhere and bring you home again. The Lightning was stable at high altitude, comfortable on long flights, and fast enough to outrun danger. That loyalty came at a cost. The men who learned its limits often paid with their lives. By the time the P-38J arrived, hundreds of young pilots had been lost in training or mechanical failures. Their deaths became the foundation of hard-won experience, knowledge, passed down through squadrons in the quiet briefings before missions. The Lightning forged its own breed of flyer, disciplined, methodical, patient. They were not reckless duelists like Spitfire pilots or brash gunslingers like those in Mustang's P-38. Pilots were technicians in the sky, engineers of survival, and in that mindset, the aircraft's reputation began to change. At first, Allied doctrine failed. The Lightning commanders expected it to fight like a conventional single-engine interceptor, turning, twisting, dogfighting. The P-38's weight and twin-boom drag made that suicidal. It was in the crucible of the Pacific that pilots learned the truth. The Lightning wasn't a knife fighter, it was a hammer. Using energy tactics, hit-and-run attacks from superior altitude, they turned its speed and climb into a weapon. A P-38 could dive like a meteor, fire its concentrated nose guns, and then climb away before the enemy could react against Japanese Zeros. That tactic made all the difference. The Lightning couldn't outturn them, but it didn't have to. In Europe, similar lessons followed. Pilots of the 20th and 55th Fighter groups discovered that the key to survival was teamwork. A pair of P-38s could cover each other's blind spots, using their heavy firepower to destroy enemy formations. Their long range allowed them to stay with bombers longer than any Allied escort before the arrival of the P-51. But the Lightning's tactical role extended beyond combat. Its photo reconnaissance variants, the F-4 and F-5, stripped of guns and equipped with cameras, became the eyes of the Allied advance. They photographed targets from Tunisia to Berlin, mapping defenses and tracking troop movements. Some flew unarmed, alone, hundreds of miles into enemy airspace. Their pilots, relying only on speed and altitude, brought back the intelligence that guided invasions and bombing campaigns. By 1944, P-38 groups were no longer adapting to doctrine, they were defining it. The Lightning was now a strategic weapon, a long-range fighter. Escort, interceptor, and reconnaissance platform rolled into one. Lockheed's engineers had built something ahead of its time, but not without pain. The P-38's twin Allison engines, each fitted with General Electric turbo-superchargers, gave it extraordinary high-altitude performance. No other American fighter could maintain such speed and climb beyond 25,000 feet, but those same systems were complex and fragile. Turbochargers overheated, oil lines burst, mechanics in the field struggled with synchronization, and the slightest imbalance could send the aircraft into violent vibrations. The P-38 demanded precision maintenance, a challenge in remote, makeshift airfields. Yet the aircraft's engineering also provided innovations decades ahead of its peers. The Lightning's tricycle landing gear offered stability on rough strips. Its centralized armament, mounted in the nose rather than the wings, gave it unmatched accuracy, and its counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque roll, making it remarkably stable in climbs. The one flaw that nearly doomed it, compressibility, would later rewrite aviation science at high speeds in a dive. Airflow over the wings reached near supersonic velocity, locking the controls. Dozens of pilots died before Lockheed and the Air Force realized what was happening. Wing tunnel tests revealed shockwaves forming at around 68 Mach, the first documented evidence of what would later be called transonic flight. The fix came in the P-38J and P-38L, which added dive recovery flaps under the wings. With them, pilots could recover safely from high-speed dives, and the Lightning finally became the weapon it was always meant to be. By the summer of 1944, it was no longer an experimental machine. It was a precision instrument of war. The pilots had adapted, the tactics had matured, the technology had caught up. But one perspective remained: the enemies to the Germans. The P-38 would soon become something else entirely, a symbol of dread. To the Luftwaffe, the P-38 Lightning was a riddle. When it first appeared in the skies over Tunisia in late 1942, German pilots were unsure what to make of it. Its twin-boom silhouette was unmistakable. Nothing in their inventory looked like it. Reports described it as a Doppelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. At first, they underestimated it. Experienced Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf pilots found the early P-38's clumsy in turns and quick to stall against the Bf 109F and 109G. The Lightning seemed oversized. Its large frame and easy target. Luftwaffe training films even mocked its silhouette, calling it a gift for the gunner. But as 1943 turned into 1944, the German tone changed. Newer P-38 variants were appearing, faster, more stable, and flown by better-trained pilots. Suddenly, bomber formations that had once been easy prey were guarded by twin-engine escorts that could dive, climb, and stay the entire mission. The P-38's nose-mounted guns, firing without convergence delay, shredded German aircraft with frightening precision. One Luftwaffe report from early 1944 noted grimly, "The twin-tail American fighter cannot be evaded by the usual role. Its fire is concentrated and deadly. Attack with great caution." For bomber crews, the presence of P-38s meant survival. For German interceptors, it meant a fight against time. The Lightning could start its escort deep over occupied France, meet returning formations, and chase down stragglers, capabilities the Luftwaffe hadn't seen before. Even worse for Germany, the P-38's long range made it the first Allied fighter capable of reaching targets inside the Reich before the P-51 Mustang's arrival. Its presence forced the Luftwaffe to commit interceptors earlier, draining their limited fuel and pilots long before they could reach the bomber streams. By mid-1944, the fork-tailed Devil was no longer a curiosity. It was a symbol of Allied reach, a sign that the air war had turned against them. Behind every improvement to the P-38 stood a stubborn conviction inside the U.S. Army Air Forces, the belief that it could not fail. Many within the Air Corps wanted to scrap the Lightning after its disastrous early record engine fires, fatal compressibility dives, and freezing issues in Europe had led to catastrophic losses, but figures like General Henry Hop Arnold, Chief of the Air Forces, and Lockheed's Kelly Johnson believed the design was too valuable to discard. Arnold understood that war was no place for perfection. It was a crucible for adaptation. He kept the Lightning in production even as critics favored the newer P-47 Thunderbolt and experimental P-51. Johnson, meanwhile, operated like a wartime surgeon, cutting out weaknesses model by model. He personally oversaw the fixes, improved intercoolers, better electrical systems, and redesigned cockpit heaters for European operations. When the P-38J rolled off the line in mid-1943, it was almost a new aircraft by the P-38L, the last major wartime variant. The Lightning had matured into a balanced and deadly platform to 1,600 horsepower per engine, boosted dive flaps, and excellent stability at all altitudes. But the leadership's commitment wasn't just technical, it was strategic. The P-38 filled a void no other aircraft could: long-range escort and photo reconnaissance. Without it, the U.S. would have been blind in vast theaters like the Pacific, where islands were hundreds of miles apart. In hindsight, that persistence was a gamble that paid off. The same aircraft that once terrified its own pilots now led some of the most daring missions of the war. By 1944, the P-38 was finally respected, but that respect came steeped in blood. Hundreds of pilots and ground crew had died perfecting it. Men lost not to combat, but to experimentation and mechanical failure, the price of progress, as one veteran engineer would later call it. For the pilots, flying the Lightning was a lonely business. Its missions were long and unforgiving, often 6 or 7 hours in a cramped, unpressurized cockpit over the Alps or the Bismarck Sea. The silence between radio calls could stretch for eternity. Many never came back. Yet those who did return carried a quiet pride. They had tamed a machine that once tried to kill them, and in doing so, they'd changed the war's rhythm. The P-38's ability to escort, strike, and scout forced the Axis to fight on terms they didn't choose. But psychologically, the Lightning represented something deeper, a symbol of American persistence in the face of failure. Every improvement, every success had been earned the hard way, through broken aircraft, through pilots' lives, through data written in blood. And that persistence, tested in desert, jungle, and snow, was about to meet its ultimate test, the moment when the Lightning would no longer be seen as a troubled experiment, but as the weapon that shattered Germany's air defenses. By 1944, the stage was set. The P-38 had evolved, its pilots were seasoned, its engines refined. Now in the skies over Germany, it would prove whether all that pain had been worth it. January 1944, RAF Chivener, England. Rows of silver P-38s sit under a hard winter sky. Frost glints off their wings like glass. Inside the ready room, men huddle over mission maps, their target, the Reich. For the first time, the 8th Air Force is sending long-range fighters deep into Germany. The bombers have been suffering catastrophic losses, 50, sometimes 60 B-17s in a single raid until now. No Allied fighter could stay with them beyond the Rhine. The Lightning will change that. That morning, the 55th Fighter Group, one of the first P-38 units stationed in England, takes off from Newhampstead Airfield. Engines thunder across the frozen countryside. The plan: escort B-17 formation striking aircraft plants near Frankfurt and Ludwigshafen. The distance will test man and machine alike, over 700 miles round trip, through freezing stratosphere and flak-filled skies. For months, the Lightning's reputation in Europe has hung in the balance. Too many have been lost to engine fires, to cold, to malfunction. Pilots have complained of cockpit frostbite, of canopy icing, of the dreaded cold soak where the oil thickens mid-flight. The aircraft's critics are waiting for proof that it can't handle Europe. But that day, the P-38s proved them wrong. As the bombers reach the target area, German Bf-109 gigaseconds and Fw-190 as rise to intercept. The Lightnings drop tanks and dive in their twin Allisons howl in chorus. Gun camera footage from the mission shows the precision that made the Lightning infamous. Nose guns locked dead ahead, tracers converging on German fighters before they can roll away. For the first time in the European theater, U.S. bombers reach their targets and return with minimal losses. The Lightning's range and firepower have done what the command hoped. They've filled the deadly gap. That success, however, is fragile in the months that follow. The weather turns against them. Ice and fog blanket England. Engines freeze. A single failed turbocharger at 25,000 feet means disaster. Maintenance crews work through the night, draining oil from every aircraft after each mission, refilling them by hand before dawn. But the crews persist, driven by the sense that they are holding a line drawn in vapor trails high above the German heartland. Elsewhere, in the Mediterranean, the Lightning achieves a triumph that changes the war's perception of air power forever. April 18, 1943. Bougainville, South Pacific. At dawn, 18 P-38s take off from Guadalcanal under radio silence. Their mission: intercept and destroy a Japanese transport plane carrying Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. Flying over 400 miles at wave-top height to avoid radar, the Lightnings navigate by stopwatch and dead reckoning when Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4M Betty appears exactly on schedule. The P-38s rise from the sea like predators in moments. They attack. The Admiral's aircraft is torn apart and crashes into the jungle. Japan's greatest naval strategist is dead. It is the most audacious interception of the war, and only the P-38 could have done it. No other fighter in existence had the range to reach the target and return. That mission, codenamed Operation Vengeance, becomes legend. It proves what Lockheed and the U.S. Army Air Forces had claimed all along. The Lightning was not a flawed concept. It was a weapon of reach and precision unmatched in the world. By mid-1944, the Lightning's dominance extends across every theater. In Italy, P-38s of the 82nd and 1st Fighter Groups slash through German transport networks, escort bombers to Ploiesti's oil fields, and duel with the Luftwaffe over the Po Valley in France. Reconnaissance Lightnings map the beaches that will become Normandy's invasion front. And in England, the improved P-38J and L models continue to push deeper into German skies. Their new intercoolers and dive flaps eliminate most of the old flaws. Pilots report faster climbs, smoother handling, and near-complete reliability, a transformation almost unthinkable a year earlier. But even in triumph, the Lightning faces its fiercest challenge yet. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang, faster, lighter, easier to maintain, begins to overshadow it in early 1944. As bomber escort duties expand, Mustangs start replacing Lightnings in Europe. To many P-38 pilots, it feels like a betrayal. They've fought to prove the aircraft's worth, only to see it replaced just as it achieves perfection. Yet command decisions are pragmatic. The Mustang's single-engine simplicity suits Europe's climate and logistics better. Still, even as its numbers decline over the continent, the Lightning continues to strike where no other fighter can go. It remains the Pacific's long-range sword, the only aircraft capable of escorting bombers to Rabaul, Biak, and eventually the Philippines. By the end of 1944, the Lightning's reputation has been reborn, from death trap to devil's twin tail. It has crossed the line from experimental to essential. But its greatest proving ground, and its most dangerous confrontation with the Luftwaffe, still lies ahead, in the frozen blue above Germany's industrial heart. There, in the winter of 1944, the Lightning will face its final reckoning and its greatest victory. November 1944, Germany. The war has reached a fever pitch. The Reich is burning. Allied bombers fill the skies. Daily, thousands of engines droning toward cities, nothing but rubble and smoke. But the Luftwaffe, though bleeding, is not finished from hidden airfields. They rise to meet the invaders, desperate, ruthless, and still deadly. This is where the Lightning earns its final legend. The 479th and 370th Fighter Groups, both flying the latest P-38L, are among the few U.S. units still using the twin-boomed fighter over Germany. Each Lightning now carries 1,600 horsepower Allison engines, dive recovery flaps, and two 300-gallon drop tanks, giving them a range exceeding 1,300 miles. They are fast, high-flying predators, their silver skins flashing in the cold sunlight above the Rhine. On November 26, 1944, bombers from the 8th Air Force strike targets deep inside the Reich, oil refineries, rail yards, and synthetic fuel plants near Merseburg and Hanover. The P-38s escort them in tight formations, engines harmonizing like an organ's steady note. Below, the world burns. Suddenly, radar controllers report enemy contact. A large formation of Messerschmitt B F-109 gigaseconds and Focke-Wulf 190. As inbound, the sky erupts. Contrails twist into white scars as fighters dive and climb through the bombers. Columns the Lightning pilots engage head-on. A German ace later recalled, "They came from above, at an angle we didn't expect, the silver twin-tail machines, all guns blazing. You could not outclimb them, and you could not escape their fire." The concentrated fire from the P-38's nose tears through the Luftwaffe formations. Their heavy cannon rounds explode inside bomber formations. But for every fortress hit, a Lightning is there, striking fast, breaking off, returning again. When the battle ends, the Luftwaffe has lost nearly 30 fighters. The Americans lose only 6 P-38s for the first time. German commanders admit in reports that the twin-engine escort has become a major threat. Weeks later, the Lightning's role shifts from escort to hunter, with the Luftwaffe's fuel supplies dwindling. U.S. command orders fighter sweeps, missions to destroy anything that moves rail lines, convoys, depots, all become targets. The P-38's range makes it ideal for this brutal work. On January 1, 1945, during the German counteroffensive known as Operation Bodenplatte, hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters launch a desperate low-level attack against Allied airfields. At Juvincourt, France, P-38s of the 370th Fighter Group scramble into the chaos. Engines roar to life amid exploding hangars. Pilots take off through smoke and debris, climbing directly into combat. Above the field, the sky is a storm of tracers. Focke-Wulfs dive through the clouds, strafing runways, but the Lightnings turn the tide. Their concentrated gunfire cuts through the attacking formation. German losses are catastrophic. That day, Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's last major offensive, collapses in failure. In the aftermath, the Lightning stands tall. It is no longer an experiment or an underdog. It is a cornerstone of Allied air dominance. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, its legend grows even larger. By late 1944, P-38s of the 5th and 13th Air Forces escort B-24 Liberators over the Philippines, Palau, and eventually Formosa, Taiwan. Their reach is unmatched. They can strike Japanese convoys hundreds of miles away, often returning on fumes. On December 7, 1944, 2 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, P-38s intercept a large formation of Japanese bombers near Leyte in a 30-minute battle. They destroy nearly the entire group, a symbolic reversal of fortune. The Pacific skies belong to the Lightning now. It is here, too, that America's two highest-scoring aces, Major Richard Bong, 40 victories, and Major Thomas McGuire, 38 victories, achieve their fame. Both fly P-38s exclusively. Their duels are legendary: head-on passes, vertical climbs, long chases over jungle and sea. Their machines bear names like Marge and Pudgy, personal emblems painted on polished aluminum. Bong and McGuire's stories end differently. Bong survives the war, only to die testing a jet in 1945. McGuire is killed in combat over the Philippines, yet together they embody the aircraft's journey, from fragile experiment to symbol of mastery. By spring 1945, the Lightning is everywhere over Europe. It strikes the ruins of Berlin over Japan. It leads bombing escorts from Iwo Jima to the home islands in Italy and Austria. It strafes retreating convoys as Allied armies close in. The Luftwaffe, once confident, now hides its planes beneath trees and camouflaged hangars when P-38s appear overhead. Ground crews scatter. The fork-tailed devil has become the signal of death from above. In reports recovered after the war, one German officer wrote, "When we saw them, we knew our time was short. They flew higher, faster, farther than anything we could stop." By the final months of the war, the P-38 has achieved what few aircraft ever could: total redemption. It has carried out every mission: escort, recon, interdiction, interception, across every major front. From North Africa's heat to the frozen skies over Germany, it has fought and evolved in the same breath. And in doing so, it has proven something rare in wartime engineering: that failure, if endured, can become strength. The Lightning's enemies are scattered, the war's end is near, but its legacy, and the cost of its triumph, will echo far beyond 1945. For victory, after all, is never without consequence. May 1945. The guns fall silent across Europe. Smoke still drifts from broken cities, and the echo of engines fades into history. Germany has surrendered. The air war, once a daily apocalypse, is over. For the pilots of the P-38 Lightning, victory feels strange. They had lived so long inside their machines, twin engines, cramped cockpit, oxygen mask pressed tight, that the quiet almost feels wrong. But when the numbers come in, the truth is undeniable. By the end of the war, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning has flown over 130,000 combat sorties. It has destroyed more than 10,000 enemy aircraft, both in the air and on the ground in the Pacific alone. It has claimed the majority of American aerial victories. It is the only American fighter produced throughout the entire duration of World War II, from Pearl Harbor to VE Day to VJ Day. In Europe, the Lightning's contribution is overshadowed by the later arrival of the P-51 Mustang. But its role was foundational. It had been the first to escort bombers deep into the Reich, the first to hunt German jets like the Me-262, and the first to provide high-altitude photographic intelligence over Berlin. Every improvement that defined the late-war American air arm range, reliability, and flexible firepower began with lessons learned in the P-38. When General Jimmy Doolittle restructured the 8th Air Force's escort strategy in early 1944, it was the P-38's endurance that allowed the bombers to survive those first full penetration raids, and when reconnaissance units needed an aircraft that could fly faster and higher than any German interceptor. It was the F-5 Lightning, the unarmed photo version, that provided the eyes of the Allies. Those photographs, taken from frozen altitudes above 30,000 feet, mapped every target for the D-Day invasion. The invasion of Normandy was guided, in part, by the lenses mounted on a P-38's nose. Half a world away, the Lightning's legacy is even more profound. From 1942 onward, the distances of the Pacific were brutal. The B-17s and early P-40s could not reach distant islands or defend the bombers en route. The P-38 changed that its twin engines and long range allowed Allied air power to leapfrog across thousands of miles, from Australia to New Guinea, from the Solomons to the Philippines. It was the Lightning that brought control of the air to the Pacific. In Operation Vengeance, the 1943 mission to intercept and kill Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the P-38 proved its strategic worth beyond doubt. No other Allied fighter had the range to carry out the mission. Only the Lightning could fly 1,000 miles, hit a precise target at the right time, and make it home. The success of that operation sent a shockwave through the Japanese command. For the rest of the war, Japan's high command rarely traveled in daylight again. By 1945, P-38s were escorting B-29 superfortresses over Tokyo from newly captured islands, missions stretching the limits of man and machine in that endless expanse of blue and fire. The Lightning became a symbol of inevitability, the quiet, relentless advance of American air power. But behind those numbers and victories lay an immense human cost. Thousands of pilots never returned. Training accidents, technical failures, and the sheer brutality of long-range combat claimed lives that never made the reports. For every successful mission, there was a silent one, a Lightning lost to the sea, to weather, or to the cold. At war's end, when pilots returned to bases in Italy, France, and the Pacific, many of their aircraft were simply abandoned rows of Lightnings sat in fields, wings gleaming under the sun, waiting to be scrapped. To some pilots, watching them dismantled felt like betrayal, the end of something deeply personal. Because for those who had flown her, the P-38 was more than a machine. It was a test of endurance, a teacher of fear and skill, and for many, a coffin with wings. The world had changed forever, and the Lightning had helped shape it. But what happened next, in the uneasy calm of post-war years, would decide its true place in history. When peace finally settled across Europe and the Pacific, the skies belonged to a new generation. Jet engines screamed across the airfields that once echoed with the deep roar of twin Allisons. The war was over, but technology had already moved on. For the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, its moment of glory was ending, but its legacy was only beginning. By 1946, America's wartime aircraft were being replaced by jet-powered designs, the P-80 Shooting Star. Also built by Lockheed and led by the same man, Clarence Kelly Johnson, who had created the P-38. In a sense, the Lightning's DNA flowed directly into the jet age, the lessons learned from its aerodynamic, CHALLENG's high-speed compressibility, engine management, and cooling systems formed the backbone of early jet design. Engineers who once fought to fix the P-38's problems now built the first generation of jet fighters that would define the Cold War. But for thousands of Lightnings parked in hangars or left on remote islands, the future had no place. In Italy, France, and the Philippines, piles of them sat in rows, canopies open, tires deflating. Wings glinting in the sun, mechanics stripped them for parts. Some were sold for scrap. Their aluminum melted down to build the world they had just fought to save. Only a handful survived, preserved by museums or bought by private owners who refused to see them vanish. Yet even as the Lightning disappeared from frontline service, its most secret contribution continued in silence. The photo reconnaissance P-38, known as the F-5, had rewritten the rules of intelligence gathering. Its cameras had photographed the Ploiesti oil fields, the Normandy beaches, the bridges of the Rhine, and the islands of Japan, often at altitudes above 30,000 feet, unarmed and alone. Those missions produced millions of images, creating the most detailed aerial archive of World War II, long after the war. Those same photos were used to document destruction, plan reconstruction, and even identify war crimes. The Lightning had not only fought the war, it had recorded it. For the men who flew her, the P-38 remained a contradiction, a machine that demanded everything and gave back both terror and triumph. Veterans described it as 2 engines and 1 chance. They remembered the silence of a dead motor over the ocean, the shock of flak bursts near the canopy, the smell of burning oil when a coolant line failed, but they also remembered the pride, the way it climbed like a rocket, the feeling of safety knowing you had 2 engines when others had 1, the calm of flight at 30,000 feet above the world. Major Richard Bong, America's top ace, once called it the only aircraft that could make you feel invincible and vulnerable at the same time. For pilots who transitioned to jets after the war, the Lightning became a benchmark, the measure of courage and control. If you could master the P-38, you could fly anything. As decades passed, the Lightning became more than just an aircraft. It became an icon, a symbol of wartime innovation and perseverance. In air shows, the silver twin-boomed shape still draws crowds. Its engines, when they start, send a deep, throaty sound across the field, a reminder of another era, when speed was measured by nerve and endurance. Historians often debate which American fighter won the air war, the rugged P-47 Thunderbolt, the elegant P-51 Mustang, or the adaptable P-38 Lightning, but perhaps that debate misses the point. The P-47 could take punishment. The P-51 could fly farther. But the P-38 did both first. It was the pioneer, the bridge between the old and the new, the machine that suffered through its flaws to pave the way for perfection. By 1945, the Lightning had gone from a death trap to a nightmare for the Reich, and by the end of the century, from an icon of survival to a ghost of the skies. Its twin tails still cast a long shadow over aviation history, and though its engines have long gone silent, their echo remains in every jet that followed, in every photograph that shaped the world's memory of the war, and in every pilot who ever dared to push a machine beyond its limits. The war is over, but the story of the Lightning, its pain, its brilliance, its transformation, continues. In the quiet years after the war, when the skies no longer carried the sound of engines and gunfire, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning remained suspended between eras, too advanced for its birth, too slow for what came after. It was never the most graceful aircraft, nor the easiest to fly. It was a machine born of necessity, built to chase speed, altitude, and range at a time when the science to control them barely existed. Every inch of its progress was paid for in risk. Every improvement was written in loss. And yet, that is precisely what makes its story extraordinary. The Lightning is not a tale of perfection. It is a tale of perseverance. From the deserts of North Africa to the frozen air over Berlin, from the jungles of New Guinea to the long blue silence of the Pacific, it fought against both the enemy and its own limitations, and won. Its evolution mirrors that of the war itself, chaotic, painful, relentless, and ultimately transformative. For the men who built it, it proved that courage could live in design. For the men who flew it, it proved that mastery came only through hardship. And for history, it proved that even a flawed creation, when pushed to its limits, could become a legend. Today, when a surviving P-38 starts its engines at an air show, the deep rumble of its twin Allison still carries something eternal, the echo of an age when innovation was a race against extinction. The Lightning's twin tails rise like a monument to human resilience, to vision born before its time, to the idea that progress often begins as failure and ends as flight. The P-38 Lightning began as a death trap. It ended as Germany's worst nightmare. And in that journey of risk, loss, adaptation, and triumph, it became something more than an airplane. It became the embodiment of the one truth every pilot, every engineer, and every soldier learned in World War II, that victory does not belong to those who never fall, but to those who rise again, through the fire and fly.